The Mystery of Roanoke, 8 Facts and 7 Theories, Part 1. If you are brand new to our channel, we invite you to take a moment to subscribe. Just click on the lit red button as well as the gray bell. Why the bell? Well, it will let you know every time we post a new video.
1. Fact: we could still trace the lost colony. The search for the lost colony of Roanoke is not over yet. In fact, it's going high-tech. In 2007, the Lost Colony of Roanoke DNA project was founded by Roberta Estes. Estes owns a private DNA testing company and hopes to solve the mystery of the colonists using oral history, like that of the Native Americans, migration patterns, historical records and DNA testing. So yes, we may still not know what happened, but the most likely scenario is probably a combination of the theories we've explored. After struggling with hostile neighbors and a drought, the colonists more than likely decided to split up and leave Roanoke in order to try and survive. Some may have tried to return to England, gone inland, integrated with the Crotons or another tribe, or been killed. One thing is for sure, it's certainly an enduring mystery. 2. Theory: they died of illness. It is possible, but unlikely, that it was illness that wiped out the Roanoke colony. The reason that it is unlikely is because they left no trace of their livelihood behind. If they had been struck down by disease, they would not have had the time to do this, and if this was the case, then why didn't White find any bodies or graves at the settlement? It was far more likely that the colonists would have brought with them diseases from the New World which would have affected the native population. Native Indians, having never been exposed to diseases like flu and smallpox, were reported to have died very quickly compared to the English, who would have had some natural immunity.
3. Fact: White never recovered from the loss. The lost colony was a tragedy for England, but most of all for White, who must have felt terrible guilt over the incident that cost him his daughter and grandchild. He never fully recovered from the loss and never again returned to the New World. In his correspondence, he wrote that he handed over their fates to God, hoping that he would comfort and help the lost colonists. After the failure of the second colony of Roanoke, White returned to Ireland, where he took time to reflect on his lost hopes and dreams in America. Little is known of his later life, but it's thought that he retired to an estate in Ireland, where he made maps of land until his death in about 1593, just 3 years. 4. Theory: the Dare Stones. In 1937, a tourist claimed to have discovered a stone inscribed by John White's daughter, Eleanor Dare, who was among the 115 missing colonists. The engraving on one side of the stone indicated that Eleanor's husband, Ananias, and her daughter, Virginia, had died in 1591. The other side explained that all but 7 of the colonists had been killed by savages, and it was signed Jude. By 1940, 47 more stones had been discovered by a local farmer in the same area, although these are strongly suspected to be forgeries. These stones tell a complicated story about Eleanor, how their group traveled, and how she eventually married a tribal chief and bore him a daughter, much to the dismay of his tribe. 5. Fact: lost artifacts. Very few artifacts have been discovered that link back to the lost colony. The reason for this lack of archaeological evidence is believed to be due to shoreline erosion, meaning that the settlement has dissolved into the shoreline over the last 4 centuries, taking any artifacts with it. The East Carolina University organized and led the Croton Project in 1998. Sending an archaeological excavation team to investigate the events at Roanoke. During their time on the island, the team uncovered a 16th century gold signet ring and 2 copper farthings, dated to have been produced in the 1670s. The gold ring contained a lion crest which was confirmed by genealogists to belong to the Kendall coat of arms. It seems likely that the ring belonged to Master Kendall, who lived in the first colony on the island between 1585 and 1586. theory, they starved to death. The findings regarding the drought conditions led a lot of people to speculate that the colonists may have starved to death due to the lack of rain needed to grow the crops needed to sustain them. This, coupled with the colonists' lack of knowledge about the land and local vegetation, seems a likely explanation for the collapse of the colony. However, it doesn't explain why they weren't found at their settlement. They may have left the island seeking assistance, but we'll never know if they found it. Imagine being in a hostile, dry land, thinking you've been abandoned by your leader. They were probably pretty desperate. Some authors have also suggested that the lack of food in the area may have been the reason that the English were killed by the natives, who may have gone scavenging for food during the drought. 7. Fact: drought conditions. One of the most difficult aspects of forming a new colony is producing food. It takes time to plant and raise crops, and we need to remember that the English were trying to farm on foreign soil, so there would have been a lot of trial and error. During this time they would have needed to forage or hunt, but again they did not know this land. And it seems that the climate during the years of the second Roanoke colony was quite harsh as well. Tree ring cores from 800-year-old cypress trees on Roanoke Island have been used to reconstruct the rain and temperature fluctuations of the island. These findings concluded that, when the settlers landed in the summer of 1587, the island was experiencing the worst growing season drought in 800 years, and this drought persisted until 1589. 8. Theory: they tried to return to England, along with being abducted by aliens. This is probably one of the most unlikely theories. However, no one knows for a certainty what happened at Roanoke, do they? The colonists must have grown desperate on the island. They didn't know how to survive on the land of the New World and faced hostility all around them from the natives. Feeling unable to retreat inland, they may have decided to try and build a seafaring vessel and return to England to seek assistance. However, it's highly unlikely that the small group could have constructed such a vessel, and even if they had, the route was brimming with Spanish ships who would have easily overpowered them.